There's a particular nation in Southeast Asia which is far too slept upon. Its resources are abundant, its population is high, and in this nation, the trees talk and they speak Vietnamese. On a more serious note, Dai Nam is an extremely high potential nation within a relatively insulated region. Indochina is a place with lots of room to grow, but simultaneously huge populations which make expansion not always even necessary. As a Western power, Vietnam's land is a good way to get opium and lumber camps. But what can Vietnam get up to when you play as it? The answer is a whole lot. Today I'm going to talk about Indochina as a region and play something of a mixed playstyle with some war, a lot of economy building, and just a dash of diplomacy. Let's get into it. So let's talk about what Vietnam has in terms of resources and expansion opportunities. You're lucky as the Great Viet of the South Kingdom. Hold on. I want to quickly talk about Vietnam's name, because as part of this video, I did some research on the meaning of Vietnam in the native Vietnamese, and it was pretty interesting. You see, Dai Nam means Great South in Vietnamese. Vietnam means Viet of the South, if read with Vietnamese word order, but it means South of the Viet, if read in Chinese word order. This begs the question of what Viet means, and it's actually a cognate with the word Yue, which are an ethnic group of Chinese people living near the Vietnamese border. See, in the history of Vietnam, there was a collection of people called the Bai Yue, which was a classification of various mixed ethnicities, including what we call Vietnamese people today, and the Yue people in South China, among others. Viet is a word which is etymologically derived from this Bai Yue word. Vietnamese people have carried down this name all the way to the modern day, meaning that Vietnam either means place south of the Yue people, or Yue people of the South place, depending on how you read its word order. All the while, Vietnamese people are an Austroasiatic people who have no linguistic relation to the Chinese people, except that upwards of half of their vocabulary are derived from Chinese words. Okay, sorry, big rant there, but I couldn't help including it since I spent a solid bit of time reading about it and wanted to share. Where was I? You're lucky as the Great Viet of the South Kingdom because you have access to every single resource in the game, either in your country to start, or in nearby, easily conquerable states, except for sulfur. There is not a single bit of sulfur anywhere in Indochina, unfortunately. Sulfur will become an important bottleneck over time, given that it is necessary for explosives, and by extension, ammunition. But when we look around us, we realize that almost all of Indochina is simply free to take. Although Siam might look a bit stronger than us with its puppets and somewhat equal army and GDP, they don't have the guiding hand of a player to build up their army and economy. We will very quickly eclipse the Siamese Empire, but we do need to prepare for it first. The usual economic supply chains are always a strong start. I like to build up tools and lumber camps, immediately switching production methods when I can to get more wood. I then use the excess tools from this loop to start mining iron and coal for steel, and I use that steel for tools. To me, that supply chain is basically the first thing to do in just about all cases. I can't imagine a nation running without tools, and steel is useful for that, as well as so many other industries like motors and weapons. For this particular nation, since we have 3 states, I chose to set up each state as its own specialized place, with Tonkin getting an agriculture decree, and Nam getting a resource decree, and Mekong getting a manufacturing decree. There's not a huge need for this, but I don't know, it just felt kinda cool. The other thing to worry about is your internal politics. I like to get rid of serfdom basically immediately, and then get professional armies since we'll be fighting Siam relatively early. If you can ban slavery, do it too. I was lucky in that a huge political movement for banning slavery came up. You might be wondering how I didn't get a civil war when the landowners were angry. Here's a cool tip for you. If your only interest group in government is angry, they can't become insurrectionary because if they exit government, you have no interest groups at all in your government. That means you can ban slavery during a political movement by just removing any other interest group from government. The best part about this is that the landowners will lose their pro-slavery ideology once slavery is abolished, so they'll only be upset for a short time. After that, you'll want to get agrarianism for now. We want interventionism, but baby steps. First, agrarianism simply so we can get to per capita taxation. I got pretty lucky in my run in that I was able to pass most laws despite low chances. As I usually say in these guides, if you can't pass any laws, consider just restarting. I was also considering isolationism, but I changed my mind because I remembered that I'm not Japan or Qing. I'm not going to be able to get some resources without trade, like the aforementioned sulfur. Next up was racial segregation. I was grabbing this law because I plan to only expand into a region that has my race of people, so I don't need anything more than that. Simultaneously, I could stay on national supremacy, but I don't want to discriminate against my non-Vietnamese pops when I'd rather see standards of living increase. Remember that discriminated pops make fewer wages and have a harder time getting educated. For that reason, we want to avoid discriminating. Besides that, I also turned my tributary Cambodia into a puppet and then annexed them at the earliest convenience. It's nice to get another state, although it's only partial control of the state, and there aren't too many interesting things in Cambodia. Siam has the part of it which controls the Angkor Wat. The other piece of diplomacy to keep in mind is based on your future war with Siam. That means any great powers with interest in the region might try to get involved, as well as Qing. You can quickly check what nations have an interest in your region by going to conquer a state against Siam. That list there is everyone who could possibly get involved. Don't actually click start the war, just check the list. You'll want to keep relations high with every great power in that list. We don't need their help, but we don't want them helping Siam most of all. To be clear, Victoria 3's diplomacy is about as transparent as... I'm no good at similes. Victoria's diplomacy is basically impossible to read and mostly a game of RNG. That being said, I've decided that I will try to make things work in this run even if the RNG doesn't go my way. Sometimes it can seem like something doesn't go your way, you have to reset. At least I feel that way pretty often. Generally speaking, unless you lose a state, having to back down during a diplomatic play isn't that bad. So those are our opening moves. Develop some early game supply chains, reform the government, and ensure the relevant great powers are happy with you. Your goal is to work towards railroads and a healthy arms industry for usage against Siam. So I played up until 1857 before starting to look outwards. My GDP was almost 20 million and I had a solid group of line infantry ready to go. You'd think my first target would be Siam, but actually I was going to try attacking something else interesting. Can I attack France and get recognition and money off of them by invading Guyana? See, the AI is usually pretty awful about sending out naval invasions. Usually they are anyway. I was thinking I could sneakily invade France's territory in Guyana and sneak off with their money. I built one naval base by having no shipyards. Even though, due to the shortage of man-of-wars, naval base never filled out its employment, I only need one single flotilla which can just be used to naval invade. I don't have to win any naval battles or have enough support to possibly win a land battle. Guyana has no garrison, so we don't need boats to support the naval invasion. I felt pretty confident in this plan. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite work. It could have worked had I done one thing differently. I should have kept a larger army garrisoned in Vietnam. See, I set basically my entire army in one boat off to Guyana. I forgot that if my troops are off invading Guyana, they aren't home to fight off a French landing. Even though France's troops are pretty strong, if they were taking a naval invasion malice against my troops who are on the defense, I'd win every time. In particular, since France can't fight using all of its hundreds of battalions at once, I'd be able to hold the beaches as long as I needed to. I made this mistake though, and I tried to get France out of my country, but unfortunately on the offense, I cannot defeat France. I kept trying though, until eventually I just white pieced. Hey, if it doesn't work on France, maybe it'll work on Britain, right? I'm gonna grab Singapore too because it's free real estate. I'm aiming for war operations, recognition, and Singapore. This would work out beautifully. I naval invaded Singapore with my one boat and Britain never even sent a naval invasion against me. Easy money and recognition. The Singapore port isn't worth a whole lot to me, but it's something I guess. It was time for the real target though, Siam. I was gonna puppet Siam in one fell swoop and basically rule most of Indochina in one war. Unfortunately, my pestering of France came back to bite me. France decided to help Siam, and this is exactly why I encourage you to do healthy diplomacy with great powers. Had I not fought France before, they might have kept out of the war. Oh well, I'm gonna try and win anyway. I don't know why I even tried, France obviously kicked my ass. They didn't have to even naval invade me, they just stood on the Siamese border and pushed through me with ease. I had to pay Siam war operations, which kinda sucks, but I've got British war operations to pay them with at least. I will have my revenge on Siam, but for now they're safe. Let's talk a bit about the early mid-game economy of Vietnam. As Vietnam, we lack one particular resource, sulfur. Fortunately for me, I've got some ports that I can use to ship in sulfur. We need this yellow powder for making fertilizer, explosives, and higher level paper production. I don't like relying on foreign markets for my raw materials, but I've got to do what I've got to do. I've been building up my iron and tools industry with the intent of changing to iron construction methods. The big reason for this is that we want to expand our economy faster. I still haven't employed all my pops, and there's lots of opportunity to export things. That being said, I'm not going to lie, creating an export economy in this game, in general, just doesn't feel all that effective. In almost every case, I'd rather use my resources to produce manufactured goods, and then just tax the workers for income, rather than export goods for tariffs. The only reason I find to export things is to increase the price of goods that don't have much demand locally. But at the same time, a resourceful player will pretty much always find a usage for their goods. I suppose, in a way, a good idea might be to build up industries with the express purpose of export, but that feels like such a waste, when I can just use my materials for local industries that benefit me without benefiting anyone else. Obviously, this goes against most economic theories about competitive advantage, but because Victoria 3 doesn't feature any real form of competitive advantage, I'm basically always better off keeping everything mostly to myself. Sure, I could export my dyes, which I produce extremely cheaply, or I could just use those cheap dyes for my own textiles, which sell clothes to my people. I think I'll do some kind of export-heavy game one day to experiment. My best experiences with exporting were when I played America during my trade guide and had to export goods because I had no more local demand and my standard of living was so high that no business could be profitable without people to sell to. At the same time though, trade causes lag, and that means it's almost always a suboptimal play. Subtle jabs at what I don't like about Victoria 3 aside, I only do a little trade here. I usually just set all my routes to protect domestic supply so I can make tariffs from foreign powers that import from me, and then I build up my own local businesses. I also spent this time focusing on my standard of living because I don't intend to welcome in a million immigrants. I was mostly doing this to increase wages across the country, which translates into higher income taxes. I built up tons of rice farms and textile industries, as well as, funnily enough, opium. See, I don't condone hard drugs, but my people seem to love consuming a ton of opium. When I did this, I saw the standard of living get pretty high up. By New Year's Eve on 1870, I was at 46 million GDP and 15.3 standard of living. I was also ready to get back at Siam for our previous embarrassment. Oh, and we also caught Jack the Ripper. What would Jack the Ripper in Vietnamese be? Nguyen the Ripper? That's a last name, though. And every Vietnamese person I know is named after someone in the Bible, so I don't know any common Vietnamese first names. No name creativity here, I guess. Got any ideas, commenters? Vietnamese Jack the Ripper? Engagement bait? Hello? Like last time, I went for a puppet play against Siam. This time France didn't support them, but instead Burma did. I was not afraid of Burma. This war was pretty straightforward. See, Siam only has irregulars, but I've got line infantry with artillery. I don't have skirmish infantry yet because I have neither lead nor sulfur for explosives and munitions, but against irregulars with no artillery, yeah, line infantry dominates. This war was big because keep in mind that Siam has a couple puppets and tributaries, namely Chiang Mai, Luang Prabang, and Champasak. That means we're going to immediately puppet the tributaries and I'll annex Champasak later on. I also got pretty lucky in that the Karen people broke free from the British Raj. That's just free land essentially, and it makes my border look much more aesthetically pleasing. Thankfully they just backed down, so things are pretty simple. I continued my campaigns into Malaya and conquered the little guys around there, again, mostly for the aesthetic look. That being said, Malaya does have lead, so it punches above its weight. Now that I've got lead, and I'm importing sulfur, I can actually start making munitions and really create a modern army. I was, however, running into a population problem in my core Vietnamese states. I researched the steam thresher to try and reduce the number of pops stuck in farms, and it did help, but man, farming takes a lot of workers to make work. In the early game, Asian countries benefit hugely from the millions of pops that can run agriculture easily, but later on when you want everyone working in highly valuable manufacturing jobs, it can suck dealing with relatively low contribution laborer and farmer pops. Especially rice farms are unique in that they can't use tractors unlike wheat farms. That means it's especially hard to pull pops out of farms unless you want to rely on foreign grain imports. But dude, screw that. Imagine having your entire food industry dependent on foreign powers and then one day getting blockaded by the British Navy. Surely something as horrific as that could never happen because no nation would outsource the basic necessities of life to a foreign market. Anyway, from here, I just kept building up the country. I put in universal voting later on, and got guaranteed liberties since I liked the increase in loyalists, and then the time came to annex Siam. Unfortunately for me, France just really couldn't leave me alone when it came to Siam. I put all my troops on the border with Siam and hoped to kinda just grab a piece of Bangkok and hold it. This sorta ended up working, but I had to be a little weaselly. I made a general with a tiny army, and just naval invaded Bangkok knowing that all the Siamese troops were at the fronts. This meant there'd be no garrison to deal with, and I could freely occupy their capital. As I got around their lines, I had free reign to occupy Siam, and I was able to capitulate them even with France supporting their armies. I really feel like throughout this entire run, France has felt a grudge for my occupation of Guyana. You'd think they'd let it go one day. Now Vietnam is looking pretty nice, with connections to the Bay of Bengal and the South China Sea. It also meant I had access to tons of pops in Thailand who I could put to work in some new industries. France also refused to let the war go, choosing to sit there, slowly using war support since they didn't have any troops around anymore. This meant I had to pay for my mobilized army for far longer than I'd have liked, but oh well. My initial goal for Vietnam was honestly just to get an idea of their potential, but I ended up really enjoying this run and kept it going. I thought about stopping it right here, but I haven't even hit 100 million GDP yet. It's far too early. I decided to go after Burma next, mostly for even more pops and for their lead, since Malaya's lead was running out. Burma gave in to my puppet demand and I annexed them a little bit later. Because I didn't have much of a navy, I didn't want to look too far. Not to mention I didn't want Vietnam to just become another colonizer. I wanted to try going as far as I could without grabbing the Boer states and Central Africa like so many of my runs ended up doing. I set my eyes on the rest of the little bits of Malaya and I was also considering Borneo. Despite my weak navy, I had enough of one to grab them. In the meantime though, I had to put down a Cambodian revolt, which I wasn't expecting. Brunei was allied to the Dutch East India Company along with Spain, who joined the war as well. My plan was to land in Brunei and occupy them before any Europeans could get their troops to the front in time. At this point, I was still apprehensive about war with Europeans despite having a pretty modern army. It's one of those things where France just really instilled the fear of Europe in me. That means that even though Spain has a lower quality army compared to me, I was still a bit worried about this war. This war was easy though, since the Europeans simply never came. I held a piece of Brunei, went into defense mode, and waited until I won. The important aspect of Brunei is that they have sulfur. I have been starved of sulfur for so long, and although I was importing some, I needed more to keep expanding my chemical plants. I needed dynamite for my mines, and a couple trade routes cannot feed my sulfur needs, how a dedicated sulfur mine can. Honestly, from here, not much more happened that was of note. I kept building more stuff and annexed a couple more puppets. I also made friends with Portugal, although I later saw they were a protectorate of Austria, so it was kind of a waste of time. It got me involved in some revolution against Portugal at one point, and then I stopped trying with Portugal. Speaking of Portugal, Portuguese adjacent nation Brazil lost control of its Afro-Brazilian people in Angola Janga, or Little Angola in bastardized Kimbundu as interpreted by a Portuguese speaker. That is to say, it's not a direct translation, but it's what is commonly understood to be the meaning of the nation's name. There's actually a book about the runaway Brazilian slaves by Marcelo de Salete, which presumably is about that history. I haven't read the book, so I couldn't tell you. With most of my military ambitions complete, I looked inwards. Though there were still some little pieces of Malaya I had to take, I had my fill of war for now. I'm going to focus on inflating my GDP now, while I also do a little diplomacy with other powers who might bother me later when I go to finish off the Malayans. This part of my playthrough is one cycle. Check what's expensive, produce more of it, take excess government budget and convert it into either government bureaucracy or construction sectors. By taking that loop and repeating it over and over, you will see your GDP increasing and your standard of living rise as jobs get higher in quality and regularly consumed goods are cheaper. By 1900, I got to 300 million GDP and even got a suffragette movement, which gave me more workforce. I would go more into detail, but you've got to understand that for basically every nation, this cycle is the same. All that changes is what you're actually building, where you're building it, and how much of it you can build. The last thing I wanted to do for this run was switch over to the Council Republic. Remember that in real life, Vietnam is a communist nation. I wanted to see if Dai Nam got some kind of new name or new color or anything when they go communist. Qing becomes the People's Republic of China and turns red if they go Council Republic, for example. Unfortunately for me, my interest groups were pretty evenly split between pro and anti-communist groups. I grabbed outlawed dissent so I could start promoting the trade unions and suppressing the industrialists in the hopes of reaching for a Council Republic. I actually almost passed the change to Council Republic around 1905, but I kept on failing to pass the law, which really sucked because I managed to stay right on the verge of revolution without going over into one. By the way, I was looking at the culture map mode just because I enjoy that sometimes, and my goodness, look what happened to America. Dixie culture has been isolated to Florida, Tennessee, and DC, while African Americans and some plain old Africans, with a sprinkling of Frenchmen in between, have dominated the South. Pretty cool. Also, Brazil is New Israel, I guess. Man, what a strange game this one was. As I was trying to pass Council Republic, I did a few other things, including my first ever grand exhibition. I have no idea what this button does, so I clicked it and wanted to see. Apparently I have this bar, which I can fill by researching technologies and doing expeditions. Okay, I'll do that. I only had access to the Pacific Coast expedition, so I started on that. Normally I hate expeditions because it's a completely opaque system which is purely RNG, but I was bored, so why not? Despite completing a couple expeditions in the Pacific, I only barely made any progress at all on the grand exhibitions, so rip I guess. I have no idea how to make progress on that thing. I have like 80% literacy and over 100 innovations per week, so I'm getting tech pretty fast. Maybe one day I'll find out what the grand exhibition does. Oh hey, a civil war. I didn't notice that the revolution was coming, which was rather unfortunate given that the revolution held several states which were extremely important to my economy. I was dreading this war, but thankfully my diplomatic ties with Austria finally paid off. They came to my aid, and I basically used them to put down the revolution. Simultaneously, I did pass the change to Council Republic, which unfortunately didn't change anything about the country except the flag. Now I have the big star in the middle, just like real life Vietnam. Next up, I started on becoming an ethno-state because, well, I don't know, I guess why not? Look, it's 1913, and the game is super laggy, and I'm just doing it to pass time, to be honest. That civil war sure did knock down my GDP, though. I went from almost 600 million down to 150 million during the war, and then back up to 300 million once the revolution was crushed. I took the time to redo all my production methods and get things back on track, which within good time they did. By the way, the grand exhibition timed out, and it fired anyway, I guess? I got 100 prestige from it, and now I wonder what you get if you actually fill up the bar. I was nowhere close to filling it and got 100 prestige anyway. When I changed to Council Republic, by the way, I basically traded economic growth for standard of living. This is generally speaking the trade-off of a Council Republic. No capitalists means no investment pool, but it also means everyone's richer since profits aren't concentrated into a small population. I used my newfound stability after the revolution and finally finished conquering Malaya. The East India Company got independence at one point and I used my alliance with Austria to attack them, with the hopes they'd back down. Thankfully they did, since I was in no mood for a big war against India. I then attacked the last two insignificant powers in Malaya and finally united the peninsula properly. I then focused back on my own country and started subsidizing many of my less profitable industries to help keep my work accounts as a business. I was basically taxing my people and redistributing that wealth to the various lesser industries within the country. Funnily enough, that means that as a Vietnamese ethno-state, I was taxing Vietnamese people and reinvesting that money into businesses owned by discriminated pops. Yeah, I'm sure that was a bit of a cognitive dissonance. Maybe it was like some kind of Vietnamese superiority complex, like giving charity but only to demonstrate how much better you are. Either way, usually those subsidies pay for themselves in the form of allowing the GDP to grow larger despite low profits and paying out higher wages which I could tax. Around 1918 though, I kinda just stopped building and let myself coast in the constant GDP growth from my subsidized industries. Since almost all of my consumption was domestic, it meant that the subsidies would increase wages across the country, and thus increase standards of living, which itself increases domestic consumption. This is why, even though I'm building nothing, my GDP is growing more and more. I hit 30 standard of living in 1919, and was actually pretty proud of that. Oftentimes, Council Republic is a shortcut to higher standards of living, but it still felt nice to get to that juicy 30 mark. I didn't quite hit a billion GDP, but that's fine for me. I think I played a pretty damn good Vietnam here. I followed the communist path of the Socialism journal entries, and the reward was, as is often the case of Victoria 3 journal entries, lackluster. If you get a bunch of your institutions up to level 5, you get an extra 20% bureaucracy for 5 years. Amazing. In 1922, I had 950 million GDP, although my budget completely collapsed because I just subsidized every industry to inflate the GDP at the last minute. Rest assured, this economy is not healthy and could be fixed by removing some subsidies to rebalance the budget. I had 92% literacy and level 33 standard of living. My entire population is basically loyalists with just a handful of radicals, and I dominate the world economically. So that's Vietnam. Honestly, that was a great experience. Vietnam is that perfect balance of being relatively strong in its own region but still being subject to the whims of great powers, meaning you have to play around them. You have most of the resources of the game around except oil and sulfur. Thankfully though, you can just not use oil for most economies. I find it interesting that despite how important oil is in real life, in Victoria 3 you really don't need it. It can be nice, but so few production methods use oil that it's not particularly needed. The lack of sulfur was a pain, but was resolved later on in Brunei, and via trade in the early game. I actually never did hit #1 great power in the game, if only because Austria actually killed it this game. They had like 500 million GDP, which is insane for an unmodded AI. I don't know what they did to get it, but I was blown away. I have never seen an AI get that high of a GDP anywhere, let alone in person. Keep in mind that this is not a modded save, this is completely vanilla, and Austria just had an absolute god tier game. Either way, that's Vietnam. I recommend you try them out, and maybe take the nation in a different direction to experiment a bit. Thank you for your time.